today. Our speaker today is the Director of Communications and Public Relations for the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute, also known as the DWFI, at the University of Nebraska, where she shares the Institute's important work of feeding the world through best use of our scarce water resources. She is a marketing communications professional with more than 15 years of experience in strategic planning, marketing, advertising, and communications and public relations. Frances plays a key role in strategic communication of the Institute's mission. She develops, implements, and leads its internal and external communications, enhancing its reputation both domestically and internationally. In addition to all of that, she also manages the coordination, the program planning, the administration, and logistics necessary to execute the Institute's Water for Food Global Conference and other DWFI-sponsored symposia. Frances Hayes is a native Nebraskan and holds an interdisciplinary master's degree in marketing, communications, and advertising, and a Bachelor of Journalism degree, both from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So please join me in welcoming today's speaker, Frances Hayes.
Thankfully, my technology was working, so we'll just say a prayer that it continues to work. So thank you, Hugh, for that introduction. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for your work in raising scholarship funds. I think that's a huge accomplishment to get $60,000 from this group. So on behalf of those who work for the university and a past student, thank you for doing that. So It's really nice to be here today, and I thank you for the invite. And I, of course, was so excited to come and talk to you all today. So I'm looking at Vicki Highstreet in the audience, who I worked with when I had a graduate assistantship at Campus Recreation. And she is, if you know her, she's a great person. So I have to give a little kudos to her. So I am here today to talk about the Water for Food Global Institute. Sometimes we're kind of a hidden gem. We're working to not be so hidden. But we have been with the university for over a decade now, so we're not so young anymore. Overall, what we do is work to ensure a water and food secure world. So I'm going to go into a little bit about the university. Maybe you already know this since you're kind of tied into the university already, but the university currently has 3 institutes, like the Water for Food Global Institute. There used to be another one called Rural Futures Institute, and it kind of got lumped into other things. So now there's 3 of us. So the Water for Food Global Institute, the Buffett Early Childhood Institute, and the National Strategic Research Institute. So we all function a little bit differently, but we're kind of an arm of the University of Nebraska system. So we get to utilize all the resources and things like that, but we might have different funding than, say, an academic department or an entity that actually lives within the university. So that's a little bit about the institutes. Our mission is to have a lasting and significant impact, so impact is the key word there, on achieving more food security with less pressure on scarce water resources. So water for food is really our bread and butter. So how we're using water efficiently, effectively to grow food, and I suppose we could lump fuel into this as well as we think about making ethanol with corn that we grow here in Nebraska. We do this through scientific and policy research, engaging with farmers, policymakers, and investors, and sharing knowledge and catalyzing change. So the third point there is obviously the hardest one to do, and something that I'm sort of tasked with. So I work with a lot of researchers that are incredibly intelligent and doing lots of great things. So my job is to make that accessible to others, get people to use the research and implement it, all the way down to the farmer level. So we don't work directly with a lot of farmers unless it's like a focus group that we're working with. But where we're more aiming to create changes through advisors or maybe extension or those people that are training farmers on all these things, because we can't do all of that. So a little brief timeline about the Institute. So I started at the Institute in 2018, so I've been there just over 5 years. But in 2009, the chairman of the Robert B. Doherty Foundation. So to back it up a little bit further, Robert B. Doherty was the gentleman who commercialized center pivot irrigation. And he founded Valmont Industries, which is a center pivot irrigation company that is headquartered here in Nebraska. So he met with the new president at the time, J.D. Milliken, to share Bob Doherty's vision of having this institute that would do this research related to water and food. So in 2009, we had the first Water for Food Global Conference, which is our signature conference, and it was kind of a trial to see if there was interest in doing this sort of thing. And then in 2010, the RBDF made a $50 million gift to the NU Foundation to fund the Institute. So I'm keeping this super short. There's a lot that happened within this timeline. But in 2020, during the pandemic, we turned 10 years old, so we didn't get to have our 10-year anniversary big party to celebrate that. But in that year, we also created the Water, Climate, and Health Program through a gift by Dr. Ann Hubbard. I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but that's a partnership with the UNMC College of Public Health, the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and our institute. So we combine our expertise to do research related to water, climate, and health. And then this year, it's 2024, what happened? In 2023, we were chosen by USAID to lead the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Irrigation and Mechanization Systems. We call it ILIMS, so it's not a great acronym, but you work with what you've got. So USAID has about 21, I believe, of these Feed the Future Innovation Labs where they research different things related to food security globally in hopes of also keeping the U.S. safe as well, and in the interest of national security. So I'm not going to read this exactly, but these are our focus areas when the Institute was set up. We're currently working on our next strategic plan, so you might see these change a little bit. But a big one for us is closing water and agricultural productivity gaps. So what that means in plain English is helping farmers to continue to have great yields in their fields, but by using less water. So we can do that through better measurements, through better predicting how much water crops are using, which is called evapotranspiration, if you want to impress your friends later with that word. So things like that, just being more efficient with our water, but also maintaining those yields that we need to feed our population here in Nebraska, in the US, and around the world. And then, through the years, we've added this public health element too, which I think is really important. We hear a lot about nitrates here in Nebraska and what we do about that and how we solve that problem while still being able to grow food in our state. And then also drought is a big one. I guess drought and flooding, getting the water when you need it at the right time, how to store it, all those fun things. So that's what the Institute was founded on. This is a great video that's on our website. I'm going to skip it. The audio doesn't seem to be working great, but it's kind of old anyway, at full disclosure. So we're working on a new video with that. But some of the footage in the video, I had the opportunity to visit Rwanda in 2019 to kind of get a up-close view of some of our work there. A lot of people wonder why we work in Rwanda, and it's somewhat twofold. One is that the government is very willing to work with universities and things. We also have a collaboration with the country on a University of Nebraska side of things, I guess. A lot of students from Rwanda come to the University of Nebraska and study, and then they go back to Rwanda and share that information with their families and other farmers that live there and things. And so that relationship is already set up, and so that's really important. As you all know, having worked with the university, having something that's already in place to be able to expand on that is really key and can help us do things a lot faster. Richard Ferguson, I believe his name is, he also used to work here at the university, and he now lives in Rwanda and started the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. And so some of the professors here at the university help create course content there. So it's this great kind of symbiotic relationship. But it works well for us too, because a lot of what we're researching is how to help smallholder farmers. So those that have smaller fields, not like the large ones here in Nebraska, but smaller fields, how they can be more efficient and continue to grow the food they need for their country. So in Rwanda, for example, they're really just growing enough food to feed their family, but there's potential there that they could grow and have another growing season, grow enough food to sell that and increase their livelihood, create some income for their country, for their family, and that sort of thing. And they grow a lot of high value crops that are a lot different than what we grow here. So that's the why Rwanda question. Okay. So we are also really excited that the Nebraska Water Center is one of our partners. So they've been around for, I believe, 50 years. Started on a federal mandate to create water centers in every state. So they deal a lot with water issues here in Nebraska, as their name might suggest. While we're looking at water for food, they deal with really any water issues here in the U.S. So that might be urban water, wastewater, all sorts of things. Their director is he served on the, kind of butcher the name, the committee that searched for the second source of water for Lincoln. So they advise in those type of things. But we have a colleague who is really active in Nebraska Extension. So she's going out across Nebraska to get input from farmers and see what the issues are and bring that back to us. So we work closely together, we office together. And then there's also the Water, Climate, and Health Program, which I mentioned was started in 2020. So now on our leadership team, we have Jesse Bell from the College of Public Health, and he's always speaking somewhere or the other, but he's has a lot of expertise in the area of climate change and human health, how drought affects human health, all of those type of things. So we continue to work with them. They have grown their team exponentially, which is wonderful. And I think that's another thing that sets the Institute apart is this climate change and human health piece. A lot of places don't have that connection and have that expertise. So there are a lot of water institutes around the U.S. And so we're always trying to figure out what makes us different. Why do people want to work with us when there are all these other water institutes? So I think the focus that we have on agriculture is a big part of that. If it doesn't fit into water for food, we're not experts in it. So we as an institute don't do things like studying wastewater because it doesn't necessarily relate to growing food. We also have a bit more flexibility than some others. So there might be non-governmental organizations that are a little bit more tied in what they can work with. They might work a little slower. We like to think that we have a little bit of leeway in terms of creativity and flexibility for what we're studying. People that I talk to around the world, they also are really curious why our institute is centered in Nebraska. And I think we all probably know that that's a pretty easy answer, that we have this living lab at our doorstep. Probably I wouldn't have to walk very far, I think, to find some research plots or somewhere that the University of Nebraska is doing research on agriculture. And I think that's really key because you can research all you want and publish papers and things like that, and those are great things. We need to have sound science, but we also have to test that with farmers and ranchers and all the people that actually would have to implement that research and make sure that it works how we think it's going to work. So I think that's a really big positive for our institute that we are located in Nebraska. We're also located over this, the Ogallala Aquifer, so this big body of groundwater that we have that expertise in. And that's become a lot more clear to me over the past couple of years as different governments from around the world have asked for our input on their groundwater use. They don't track things like we do in Nebraska. They don't have things like natural resource districts and things. And I'm always really surprised, especially at our conference, how many people are so interested in our NRDs because it's a very unique system and regulation to ensuring that we protect our groundwater and have that for future generations. So I think our location is really key, and I think when the Robert B. Doherty Foundation set that up, they kind of realized that too. And then partnerships is definitely a big thing too. As I mentioned, we get to use the expertise of the University of Nebraska. So we have what we call faculty fellows, 130 of them across all 4 campuses that we get to draw on their expertise, collaborate on grants and projects with them as well. So that's definitely a win-win. And then we also have relationships with those in the private sector, NGOs, places like the World Bank, the Nature Conservancy, those type of partnerships that can really accelerate our research too, so that we can get beyond our 4 walls. And on the subject of student support, we also have supported students each year. So over the history of the Institute, we've given $3.14 million in support of student research. And some of that is matched and some of it isn't, but I think that's really key to our mission too, is supporting those students that are then going to continue the research and go off into their professional careers and really make an impact. Do you know how much time I have left? I didn't look when I started. Okay. So I mentioned the Be the Future Innovation Lab for Irrigation and Mechanization Systems earlier. So this is a new award that was given to us. It starts at $19 million, which is great, and it goes for 5 years with the chance to get extended. But I think this just shows how much USAID trusts us, that they would give us this lab. And the purpose of it, so if you think of mechanization as like tractors and things to work the land and things like that. And they were really big on putting systems in the title too. So the idea behind this lab is that we would help smallholder farmers be able to produce more. So when I went to Rwanda, it was really interesting because they pretty much do everything by hand. And they might have a tractor that they share amongst them all, but if it breaks, there's no person that shows up to fix it, or they can't get the parts or things like that. So this systems piece is really key. I think that they've developed this infrastructure to have the equipment and be able to get it fixed and create this economy around these type of things. So we're just kind of getting off the ground with this. We're really excited that we were able to hire someone that we knew closely but had done an innovation lab at Texas A&M, I believe. So that'll be a big thing that we're ramping up. So where we work, the blue highlighted countries are those that we have a lot of projects in. The green are ones that we have kind of one-off projects or we've worked in before. And then if you can see the yellow, those are the countries that will be focused on with the new ILIMS. But if we look at where our faculty fellows are working, it's kind of really all over the world. So again, it's all about this networking and these collaborations that we can form. So I don't know, I think you might have some of our brochures on your tables, but I'm going to run through some of the highlights, I guess, very quickly. And those are featured a bit more in that brochure. But I have a large part in coordinating our global conference, which I think we're going to do it every 2 years now. So we had our last one in May at Innovation Campus, and it was really exciting to see all of these people come in from all over the world wanting to learn from us and wanting to learn from each other about how we grow food and protect our water and feed the world. So this picture is we had Beth Ford, the president and CEO of Land O'Lakes, come and talk during this. She was a Huberman lecturer, so that was a really big thing, and I think we had great discussions with her, and our university administration had great discussions with her about how we just advance this mission. So we had this conference over 4 days. We were able to show them fun parts of Nebraska, and we went to NREC, and we went to a feedlot, which was exciting for me. Got to see some cows. And we went to some farms, and everyone was wowed by these large pieces of equipment that we have here. So sometimes you forget how just how lucky, I guess, we are in terms of farming here, that we have all this great equipment and stuff. So we brought in 123 speakers. We had 425 attendees. And it went really, really well. We had more than 27 countries and nations represented. And then we also live streamed everything. So we had others from other countries visit too. So I think the great thing about our conference is that it's not too big. Sometimes we go to these conferences internationally and they're too big to really make enough connections and things like that. But people like the size that we are. So we're going to probably just continue that. Another project I mentioned, smallholder farmers in Rwanda. So what our policy team is researching is you kind of have the assumption that smallholder farmers should own their own irrigation equipment. That would be the most efficient thing, the best thing to do. And so our team has kind of challenged that and looked at what smallholder farmers really need. So we have a team of, I believe, 3 colleagues in Rwanda that go out and they talk with farmers about what's holding them back, what are some issues you have, how could we solve these problems, and then they kind of form recommendations from that. So that's gotten some play in that area, that irrigation ownership, equipment ownership might not always be best. So we're looking at a lot of that ecosystem of maybe we have people that rent out irrigation equipment to these farmers, so they don't have to maintain it. They just hire them and they come and they do it. And so that's just one of the projects that we've been working on within the past year. The Water, Climate, and Health Program, again, that's a big piece. We are doing more and more with this program, but I think some of the highlights that they've done is they have been a part of the urban heat mapping through, I'm not sure who that was from, but they basically mapped out heat within the Omaha area and saw where it affects people differently, and it was usually in lower income communities, and how we might rectify that so that when it's very hot in the summer, things that we can do to solve that, whether it's planting trees or this type of infrastructure and things like that. They also have had a big impact in the Alt-In study with I'm blanking on the word. I won't go into that, but basically Alt-In, it's too complicated. Alton was a plant where they would use byproduct from ethanol, making ethanol into a useful substance for farmers. And there was some seepage going on and things like that. And so some of the residents are having some health issues. And so they're working on figuring out how to fix that, what all it has caused and things like that. So if you're all likely probably aware of that, but if you're not, just Google Alton and you'll find all sorts of reading material. So on the research side of things, we do a lot with, they're called eddy covariance flux towers. This was a term I had to learn when I started at the Institute, but they are things that measure evapotranspiration in plants. So that's the full water use of the plant, either through the uptake of the plant, the transpiration of the plant when it gets hot, how much water is coming off the soil. So then we can really see, okay, how much exactly does this plant need? So this research has been used in various ways. We've added sensors to it to help validate carbon capture and greenhouse gas emissions with the Department of Energy. We're collaborating on a project that would make a dashboard for farmers so they could look at their fields and say, oh, this field is using this much water, here's how much I should put on in irrigation, which is a win-win because farmers have to pay to run those center pivots. And then it also prevents us from overwatering crops. So that is another project. And then we also do a lot with like groundwater transfer and policy related to water moving throughout the state. Again, I'm going to keep that very vague for today, but so NRDs have to make a lot of decisions about how much they allow people to pump and things like that. And so we work closely with NRDs to figure out what works in that sense, what regulations might work, which might not, how they can work it out between those local areas. So looking ahead, I mentioned that we're working more on our strategic plan coming up. So we're trying to make sure that what we focus on now is what we want to focus on in the future. But what I see coming up is this continued focus on smallholder agriculture. So continuing our relationship with Rwanda, expanding that into more sub-Saharan Africa countries. This high productivity, high technology, sustainable agriculture. So again, those flux towers and making sure that we're being efficient with our water use. And one thing that is important to note too, I think, is we as an institute, we like to take the knowledge of Nebraska and bring it to the world, but there's also things when we're working with partners all over the world that we can bring that knowledge to Nebraska as well. And we don't know that's what's out there if we don't go work with these other communities and these other entities. So, and then the last one is just continuing the water, climate, and health focus as well. So hopefully that wasn't too back and forth. If you want a great video, you can go to our website. It has some of kind of some pictures of what we do. Sometimes it's hard to convey that in a quick presentation, but I'll leave you with this quote from our past board director, Howard W. Buffett. And I'll just leave that up there for now, but I think there's time for questions if anyone has any.
In terms of food insecurity, percentage of the world, how many folks really are struggling with food insecurity? And are we struggling with that in Nebraska?
Short answer is yes. I think you really put me on the spot with the percentage question, but I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. I think another thing that we talk about a lot is proper nutrition. So we can grow a lot of food, but is it the right food for what our bodies need? So, cereal grains are some of the cheapest things to produce, but We also want kids to have fruits and vegetables and things that fuel their mind and things like that. So nutrition has been a bigger part of the conversation within this industry as well. So I don't know the answer to your percentage question, but I do know that we also struggle with food insecurity here in Nebraska, and a lot of it is like, what is the right food, getting the right food.
Seems like I had heard not too long ago that the Ogallala aquifer had decreased in terms of its content. I don't remember what I had heard, but the people in the Institute, are you doing things to try to offset the losses, mitigate the losses? Like, is there anything that goes on with irrigation restriction, with crop farmers?
Yeah. So that would probably be more so under the Nebraska Water Center arm of things. They're the experts in that area. I think it's, as far as using the water for crops, that's probably an NRD issue, as they're the ones that regulate that, and they're an elected body that has taxation power. So a lot of what the Nebraska Water Center will do is, provide recommendations to the NRDs, and then they decide if they want to use them or not. And that's kind of how the university, I would say, functions as well. So if you want to talk after, I can get you some more specifics about that from my colleague, but yeah.
Yes, you hear a lot about pig farms in Nebraska. Are you involved in terms of doing research in terms of the pollution problems we have with that?
I will say we don't do a lot of that. Yeah, mostly with our livestock, we're focused on cattle generally, but
Is there anybody involved with that? In terms of determining the amount of pollution that comes from these pig farms?
not that I can think of through the institute. I would imagine through the university, yes. Yeah.
When you have issues or concerns with large corporations that do not reside in Nebraska, but own a lot of property.
Yeah, that's a tough question too. I'll be honest, we don't focus our research on that very much. We're mostly working with the groups that are working with farmers. So I know that has been in the news a lot of outside people purchasing land in Nebraska and owning that and what that causes. I honestly don't know much about it, so I don't feel like I can speak on that.
I'm the Water, Climate, and Health group, and you talked about heat mapping, but could you explain a little bit more what they do, and are they going to be working with individual groups around Nebraska and the world?
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of some of the studies that they're working on right now. So right now they're doing some work on looking into nitrates and pediatric cancer. I think the University of Nebraska Med Center has seen some relationship between that, but you never really know until you get out there and research it. So I think that's a big concern. We have high nitrates here in Nebraska, and that's an issue that we've had for a long time. And so what are the effects of that on young people? So that's a big one. I think I used the heat mapping example, but it wasn't a good one because it's not water and food. But they also have projects outside of water for food. So I think that's the big one. Also, economic impacts to communities based off nitrates. So what are different communities having to pay to fix those issues, and what are the options there? They also do a lot with well testing. So in the rural parts of our state, there aren't the wells aren't regulated, so you might have community members drinking from these wells with high nitrate levels and they just don't even know it because they don't know to test their wells. So some of that is outreach as well. So those are some of the types of projects that they're working on.
I have a simple question. Is Howard W. Buffett the grandson of R. Warren Buffett?
Yes, he is.
Nice. Thank you.
Finally one I can answer. Thank you. Yeah, he was on our board and he just moved off, so we were glad to have him.
Our experience in East Africa was that the men control the tractors and the women do the farming. I'm just wondering what programs we have dealing with women who are actually doing most of the labor on smallholder farms.
Yeah, so that is something that we explicitly wrote out in our Feed the Future Lab proposal, was that is a big pillar of what that research is going to entail, is women farmers. So a lot of times they are doing a lot of the farming, and sometimes they're doing the work, but they might not be able to have input into all the things related to farming. They may not be able to own the land and things like that. So that's a big part of what the lab will be looking at too.
I'm not expecting this to be your purview, but somebody in the crowd may be. I'm under the impression that the nitrates are not necessarily from recent farming, recent in these decades, but may date back 100 years. Is anybody, at least part of it, I'm not saying at every level, does anybody know anything about that?
Bob Kazelka. And I was, before I retired, I was Associate Director of the Center for Rural Affairs, the Water Center. I doubt that the nitrate, other than natural nitrate, it goes back 100 years. But nitrate easily goes back 50 years with the beginning of irrigated agriculture, particularly with the center pivot. Initially, the center pivot was the evil person in regards to nitrate because nitrate was being applied through them with the water indiscriminately. I guess that'd be a safe word to use. Since then, center pivots have now become the poster child for good farming because technology has it so that as it goes around the field, it can apply chemicals and water as the soil it's over means. And that can all be programmed into a center pivot. The problem with nitrates, and I wrote 2 manuals about what NRD should do with nitrates based on state law, is that it does somewhat stay in the soil. And it will, if you go back to putting on too much water, it'll soak it down into the area where it'll get into the aquifer. The big problem in Nebraska primarily was in the Platte Valley because the soil and the materials there are very absorptive and everything would go on through. And there's been research going for a long time, and nitrates always are going to come back as long as you use them for fertilizer.
And then, well, you could probably speak more on this too, but the Water Sciences Lab here on East Campus does a lot of work with beta zone testing. So they're testing long chunks of soil and determining how much nitrate is very far down and how long that has existed there. So
I would add to what Bob said just a little bit. The nitrate that we had in our native prairie soils was almost negligible part of what we see in the groundwater now. Almost all of it has occurred since high yield agriculture, single crosses, one thing and another, since the 1960s. And we were applying tremendous amounts of nitrate, but also tremendous amounts of irrigation water to access. And we leached that down. Today, we're doing a better job, certainly not a perfect job, because we're still not capturing a third or more of the nitrate that we apply to soils in our crops. And so there's potential to if we're not increasing it in the Vados zone and the aquifers, we're not decreasing it. And there may be ways to go about doing that with some regenerative agriculture techniques, but there's lots of work trying to figure out how to make that efficient and more efficient watering and nitrogen applications in the recent patents that have come out of the University of Nebraska, I think are going to be important in doing that.
So I'm Rick Goodman, I'm from Food Science, and a number of decades ago I worked at Monsanto on the safety assessment of genetically engineered crops. One of the things that I find very perplexing in the divided world we have, not just in Nebraska, but all over the world, and certainly in Africa, because I was in Rwanda a couple of years ago and Kenya this last year, is that people have misconceptions about GMOs. They're not safe. And even the American Pediatric Association just put out a terrible paper suggesting that kids' health is impacted by GMOs and glyphosate, the herbicide that is used in a lot of crops that are grown well with the application of herbicides. Certainly in Africa, there's a huge influence of social media stuff and organizations, NGOs, that are spreading a lot of misconceptions. I mean, the genetically engineered crops that are approved in the US and globally really have a very good safety record, and they don't cause health effects. And I would challenge anybody to show me data that says they do. So one of the interesting things in Africa is a couple of companies got together with some academics and made something called Tila maize, which is a water-efficient maize for Africa, has insect-resistant traits, has drought-tolerance trait to make maize a much more efficient crop. And so there are organizations, partly from Europe, that are helping to suppress that. And I have to say, it's kind of like politics, I didn't say that, in this country, is look deeply. Don't just take somebody's blah, blah, blah and say, I have to vote one way or the other. And most of the countries in Africa have avoided GMOs. And in this country, we have what's on your food package? Does it say non-GMO? And what does that tell you? It's interesting, but we need to talk more across water for food and agronomy and horticulture and food and think about the problems that we have. So that's just a suggestion. Sorry, this is my first time in this meeting.
Thank you. I love learning from all of you too. You have much more experience.
Take one more question.
Great.